Have you ever noticed how quickly fear rises, even when you're safe? Fear of speaking, fear of disappointing someone, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being too much, fear of being abandoned. And sometimes that fear feels so familiar, you assume it must simply be who you are. But what if it isn't? What if much of that fear was learned long before you had the awareness to question it? In this conversation, we're going to look at how fear becomes conditioning and how it quietly shapes the life you believe you're allowed to live. I don't remember a day in my youth where fear wasn't present in some form. I grew up in a very strict religious environment where obedience was emphasized and where men held authority in the family and community. And in my own home, my relationship with my father carried its own layer of fear. A fear that stayed with me well into adulthood, even after I was married. So fear became familiar very early. I feared men. I feared doing something wrong. I feared stepping outside the narrow lines I had been given. I feared my own thoughts, my own choices. I feared even questioning what I had been taught. College felt dangerous. Work felt dangerous. Independence felt dangerous. Fear wasn't occasional, it was constant. It felt woven into how I understood life. Not just something that appeared in certain moments, but something that quietly shaped the way I moved through the world. The decisions I made, the risks I avoided, the parts of myself I held back. With time, fear can begin to feel like something you're always pushing against. A force you have to fight through just to show up in your own life. Around the age of 28, I began to see how deeply ingrained it was. What I had always believed was wisdom was actually conditioning. And once I saw how much of my life had been shaped by it, I couldn't unsee it. That awareness set me on a deliberate path of uprooting it. And from that point forward, I stopped assuming fear was truth. Fear itself is not the enemy. Fear is a biological survival mechanism. It is designed to protect. It alerts us to danger. It sharpens awareness. It keeps us alive. The mind is constantly scanning your environment for potential threats. If you reach towards a hot stove, your mind says, "Don't touch that burner." That warning protects you. It keeps you from getting hurt. But the mind also learns from experience. And sometimes the warnings it sends are not about present danger. They are about past memory. The problem is not fear. The problem is how fear is introduced, reinforced, and used within a system. In some environments, fear is used intentionally as a tool of control. In others, it is transmitted unintentionally through anxious parenting, rigid belief systems, trauma, and cultural messaging. Sometimes no one means harm, and yet fear becomes a governing force. When fear moves from protecting us to shape what we are allowed to think, believe, or pursue, it no longer simply protects. It limits control of behavior, control of belief, control of movement. And when fear becomes a tool used to shape choices, it doesn't just guard against danger, it confines potential. Because before fear can be released, it has to be understood. Fear is not just an emotion, it is information. It is memory. When we are young, the body cannot distinguish between physical danger and emotional rejection. So if love was conditional, if belonging felt fragile, if safety depended on obedience, fear became the mechanism that keeps us in line. And until it is brought into awareness, it quietly directs our lives. As Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Fear does not always arrive as panic. Sometimes it is quieter than that. It becomes the background hum of a life, before speaking, before choosing, before stepping forward. a thought appears. What if this is wrong? What if this costs me love? What if I lose safety? Little by little, that hum begins to feel normal. It gets renamed wisdom, caution, being careful. And that is how fear roots itself, not as an enemy, but as guidance, until we question it. Fear gradually stops feeling like something you learned. It starts feeling like who you are. I'm just anxious. I overthink. I'm not brave. I'm not built like that. I don't really need anyone. But what if you weren't built that way? What if you were shaped that way? When fear is reinforced long enough, it becomes a lens, not a reaction, a lens. We begin scanning for danger automatically, even when the room is calm. You brace before you speak. You anticipate rejection before connection. You prepare for loss before allowing love. Opportunities feel threatening instead of expansive. Community feels risky instead of supportive. And slowly, almost invisibly, you begin living smaller than you actually are. Not because you lack capacity, but because fear has become the filter through which you interpret everything. The real shift isn't becoming fearless. It's recognizing when fear is speaking and realizing you have a choice. Freedom doesn't begin when fear disappears. It begins the moment you stop assuming it's truth. There comes a quiet realization. The threat is no longer present, but the fear still is. And that raises a different question. Is this danger or is this conditioning? Because once you begin asking that question, everything changes. That question returns leadership to you, not by eliminating fear, but by refusing to automatically obey it. And that's where self-leadership begins. And if this is something you've been quietly noticing in yourself, if you're realizing fear has shaped more of your life than you thought, this is exactly why I created the Return to Self Academy. Inside the Self-Love Boot Camp Masterclass, there's an entire lesson dedicated to understanding fear at its root. Not fighting it, not shaming it, but untangling it. Because fear loses its authority the moment it's understood. If you're ready to explore that more intentionally, it's linked below. As we come to the end of this video, I want to leave you with this. What fear may be quietly shaping your choices? What belief have you accepted as truth that may simply be conditioning? Where in your life are you bracing when you no longer need to? It is safe to examine what governs you. It is safe to say no more. You are allowed to build a life that feels aligned, not one directed by old fear. And if this conversation resonates with you, you may also want to watch my video, You're Not Broken. Here's what's really happening. It connects closely to what we're exploring today. And if you prefer listening rather than watching, these conversations are also available on the Dear Rising Soul podcast, where each episode explores the same themes of healing, self-awareness, and return into yourself. With much love, I'll leave you here.